Chapter 1. The Gala. Ela Brennan had always found comfort in the quiet companionship of books. They did not judge, they did not whisper behind their hands, and they did not care that her wolf had never surfaced. In the grand library of the Silverwood Pack, surrounded by the scent of aging paper and leather, she was not the pack's wolfless Omega. She was simply Ela, the keeper of stories, the guardian of knowledge, a woman who had built a small but meaningful life among the towering shelves of her domain. Tonight, however, she could not hide. The annual lunar gala was mandatory, a glittering affair where the pack celebrated the full moon and where, it was whispered with breathless anticipation, the Alpha King Matthias Thornfield might finally feel the pull of a mate bond. Ela's simple gray dress felt like a shroud amidst the jewel-toned gowns of the other she-wolves, each one preening under the crystal chandeliers, their scents blooming with hopeful ambition. Her own scent was muted, smelling of little more than old paper and the faint, earthy aroma of the lavender soap she used, a scent that marked her as unremarkable, invisible, beneath notice. She kept to the shadowed alcoves, her heart a nervous flutter in her chest, wishing for nothing more than to be back in the silent stacks of her sanctuary. She was adjusting a platter of untouched canapes, a task assigned to her to keep her busy and out of the way, when the air in the ballroom suddenly shifted. A palpable wave of power washed over the room, silencing the chatter and stilling the dancers mid-step. Every wolf, from the highest beta to the lowest servant, turned toward the grand entrance as if pulled by an invisible force. Alpha King Matthias had arrived. He was a presence more than a man, radiating an authority that demanded submission without a single word spoken. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hair as dark as a moonless night and eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, he commanded the space simply by existing within it. His scent rolled through the hall like a winter wind, a clean, sharp fragrance of pine and frost, a scent of wild, untamed power that made lesser wolves lower their gazes instinctively. Ela felt an involuntary shiver trace its way down her spine. She had only ever seen him from a distance before this night, a formidable figure addressing the pack from the dais during formal occasions. Up close, the sheer force of his presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating in its intensity. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known defeat, his gaze sweeping the room with an unnerving focus that seemed to see everything and everyone at once. Then, impossibly, his eyes stopped. They landed on her. For a dizzying, impossible moment, the entire world fell away. The glittering ballroom, the hushed whispers, the suffocating weight of her own inadequacy vanished, as if they had never existed. There was only him. His stormy gray eyes widened, a flicker of something raw and wild igniting in their depths, something that looked almost like recognition, like coming home after a long and terrible journey. The air between them crackled with electricity, a tangible connection that pulled her forward against her will, an invisible thread tugging at the very core of her being. A warmth bloomed in her chest, a feeling she had never known in all her lonely years, like a dormant seed suddenly bursting into brilliant, impossible life. It was the mate bond. The fabled, undeniable call of one soul to another, the gift of the moon goddess herself. It could not be. Not for her, the wolfless Omega. Not with him, the Alpha King. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs with a frantic, hopeful rhythm that she could not control no matter how desperately she tried. He started toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them with predatory purpose. The crowd parted before him like the sea before a storm, their stunned silence a testament to the impossible scene unfolding before their disbelieving eyes. Ila's hands trembled at her sides. Was this real? Could the moon goddess truly have chosen her, the forgotten Omega, for the most powerful wolf in all the territories? Hope, a feeling she had long since buried beneath years of loneliness and dismissal, unfurled within her chest, fragile and beautiful as a flower blooming in winter snow. He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze so intense it felt as if he could see straight into her soul, past all her defenses and carefully constructed walls. The scent of pine and frost enveloped her like an embrace, and mixed with it now was something else, something directed only at her, a possessive, claiming aroma that made her knees feel weak and her heart race even faster. In her chest, in that quiet place where her wolf had always slumbered silent and unreachable, something stirred. A flutter, faint but undeniable, like a creature waking from a very long sleep. His eyes held hers, and in their stormy depths she saw a universe of yearning, of recognition, of a love that had existed before either of them had been born. She could see their future in that gaze, feel it in her bones, a life of meaning and partnership and belonging that she had never dared to dream could be hers. His lips parted to speak, and Isla leaned forward to hear the words that would change her life forever. Chapter 2. The Lie. But the words that came were not words of love. Matthias felt the bond hit him like a physical blow, a lightning strike that seared a path straight to his soul and left him breathless with its power. For years he had been numb, a king ruling with cold logic and brutal efficiency, his heart encased in ice since the day the Blood Moon Pack had slaughtered his parents. He had given up on finding a mate, believing himself a cursed vessel of vengeance, a danger to anyone foolish enough to love him. Then he saw her. A slip of a girl in a plain gray dress, hiding in the shadows as if she wished to disappear entirely, her scent a quiet, comforting melody of old paper and rain-soaked earth amidst the cloying perfumes of the court. And his world, so carefully controlled, so ruthlessly ordered, shattered into a million pieces. His wolf, a beast he kept chained by duty and grief, rose up with a deafening roar, screaming a single, triumphant word that echoed through every fiber of his being. Mate. 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 The pull was irresistible, a force of nature that dwarfed his own formidable will. He moved toward her, his body acting on an instinct more profound than thought, more powerful than any battle strategy or political calculation. He saw the shock and dawning hope in her wide, doe-like eyes, and for a fleeting, perfect second, he allowed himself to feel it too, a staggering, breathtaking joy that he had never believed he would experience. He saw their future in a flash of vivid clarity, her by his side, her gentle presence soothing the jagged edges of his soul, their children running through the halls of a castle filled with laughter instead of ghosts. He was 2 steps away from her, his hand already lifting to cup her cheek, the words, "my mate," forming on his lips like a prayer. Then movement caught his eye. Across the room, Baron Volkov, a visiting diplomat whose territory bordered the Blood Moon lands, shifted his position. Matthias had been watching the man for weeks, certain he was a spy, but unable to prove it without risking a diplomatic incident. Now Volkov's hand moved subtly beneath his cloak, and Matthias's trained eyes caught the glint of a blade, saw the direction of the man's gaze. The blade was not pointed at Matthias. It was pointed at her. In that frozen moment between heartbeats, Matthias understood with chilling certainty that if he claimed this gentle, vulnerable Omega, he would not be giving her a crown. He would be placing a target on her back that would never be removed. The Blood Moon Pack did not fight their enemies on the battlefield like honorable wolves. They were cowards and assassins who struck from the shadows. They had taken his parents not in glorious battle, but through poison slipped into wine, a blade in the dark, a death that had been designed to cause maximum suffering. They targeted love, twisted affection into weakness, and destroyed everything their enemies held dear. To claim Ela publicly would be to announce to every enemy he had ever made that she was the key to breaking him. Volkov would send word tonight, assassins would follow within the week. She would be dead before the moon waned, and Matthias would spend the rest of his life howling at a grave that held his heart. He could not do it. He would not. The love he felt for her, instantaneous and all-consuming, demanded a terrible sacrifice. He had to protect her, and the only way to do that in this moment, with a blade already drawn and aimed at her heart, was to become the monster everyone already believed him to be. He had to make them think she meant nothing. He had to lie so convincingly that even the spy with the hidden knife would believe it. The joy in his chest curdled into icy dread. He stopped his advance, letting his expression go cold, replacing the warmth with a mask of cruel indifference that felt like acid burning through his soul. The hope in her eyes flickered, replaced by confusion that cut him deeper than any blade ever could. He forced his lips to curl into a sneer. He forced his voice to carry, loud and clear, to every corner of the hall where enemies might be listening. The words tasted like poison on his tongue. "You?" he said, and the single syllable was a lash of contempt that made her flinch. The moon goddess has a sick sense of humor. The gasps around the room were sharp, scandalized. He saw Isla's face go pale, saw her hands begin to tremble, and he wanted to die. He wanted to cross the remaining distance between them and take her in his arms and tell her it was all a lie. But Volkov was watching. The blade was still ready. So Matthias continued to drive the knife deeper, cutting away everything he loved to keep her alive. An omega, he spat, each word a dagger he plunged into his own heart as much as hers. A wolfless omega. Do you truly believe that I, Matthias Thornfield, Alpha King of the Silverwood Pack, would ever accept a mate so pitifully weak? Her eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall, and the sight of them nearly broke him. His wolf howled in protest, clawing at the inside of his chest, begging him to stop, to take her, to protect her the way a mate should be protected. He ruthlessly suppressed it. He had to finish this. He had to make it real. "You are nothing," he said, and his voice did not waver even as his soul screamed. "A disgrace. The bond is a mistake. I reject you. I reject this mockery of a mating." He watched her heart break. He felt it through the fledgling bond, a wave of agony that nearly brought him to his knees. The warmth between them turned to ash. The connection frayed but did not sever completely, a fact that gave him the smallest, most desperate hope. "Now get out of my sight," he finished, and turned his back on her. Behind him, he heard her choked sob, the most painful sound he had ever heard in his life, worse than his mother's screams, worse than his father's final gasping breath. He strode toward the throne, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask of stone, while the other half of his soul fled from the ballroom in tears. Across the room, Volkov smiled and slipped the blade back beneath his cloak, apparently satisfied that the wolfless omega posed no threat worth acting upon. Matthias noted the location of every exit, every guard, every possible escape route. He would need them all tonight. Chapter 3. The Truth. Isla made it to her small room above the library before she collapsed. The tears came then, hot and bitter, soaking into her pillow as sobs racked her body. The pain was a physical thing, a hollowness in her chest where something warm and precious had briefly lived before being torn away. She did not know how long she lay there in the dark, replaying his words over and over, each repetition a fresh wound. "You are nothing, a disgrace. I reject you." She had allowed herself to hope. For one shining, impossible moment, she had believed that the moon goddess had seen her, had deemed her worthy of love. And then he had destroyed that hope before the entire pack, grinding it beneath his heel like a spent cigarette. A knock at her door made her freeze. It was past midnight. No one ever came to see her, especially not at this hour. She considered ignoring it, pretending to be asleep, but the knock came again, soft but insistent. She wiped her face uselessly, knowing her eyes would be swollen and red, and went to the door. When she opened it, her heart stopped. Matthias stood in the darkness of the hallway, alone. His face was haggard, stripped of the cold contempt from the ballroom, replaced by something that looked almost like anguish. Before she could speak, before she could slam the door in his face or scream at him or collapse into fresh tears, he dropped to his knees before her. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the territories, knelt at the threshold of her tiny room like a penitent seeking absolution. "Everything I said was a lie," he breathed, and his voice cracked on the words. Please, please let me explain." She should have closed the door. She should have rejected him the way he had rejected her, given him a taste of the humiliation he had forced her to swallow. But the bond, frayed and aching though it was, still connected them. She could feel his pain through it now, a desperate, howling grief that matched her own. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside and let him enter. He rose and followed her inside, closing the door behind him with the care of a man handling something infinitely precious and fragile. For a long moment he simply looked at her, drinking in the sight of her tear-stained face, and the regret in his eyes was so profound it made her chest ache. "There was a man in the ballroom tonight," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Baron Volkov. He is a spy for the Blood Moon Pack, though I cannot yet prove it without risking war. When I felt the bond, when I started toward you, I saw him draw a blade beneath his cloak. It was aimed at you." Isla's breath caught. "At me?" The Blood Moon Pack does not fight their enemies directly. They are cowards and assassins. They killed my parents not in battle, but through poison and treachery, and they did it by first discovering what my father loved most in the world and using it against him. My mother died first. They made him watch. Then they killed him, slowly, while he begged for death. His voice was steady, but she could see his hands trembling at his sides. "If I had claimed you tonight, if I had shown them that you matter to me, you would have been dead within a week. A knife in the dark, poison in your food, a staged accident. They would have found a way, and I would have been powerless to stop it, because I would not have known the threat was coming until it was too late." He stepped closer and she did not retreat. "Everything I said was a lie, Isla, a performance. I needed Volkov to believe you meant nothing to me, that the bond was unwanted and rejected. I needed him to report back to his masters that the wolfless Omega was no threat and not worth the effort of killing. It was the only way I could think of to keep you alive in that moment, with a blade already drawn and pointed at your heart." She stared at him, her mind reeling. The cruelty in the ballroom, the words that had shattered her, they had all been a shield, a desperate, terrible shield, designed to protect her from dangers she had not even known existed. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she whispered. "Why did you let me believe?" "Because I had seconds to decide, not hours. Because there were spies everywhere in that room, and I could not risk even a whisper reaching the wrong ears. And because—" he closed his eyes, his jaw tight. "Because I am a fool who thought I could protect you by destroying you. And I will never forgive myself for the pain I caused." He opened his eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. "You are my mate, Isla, the other half of my soul. From the moment I saw you, I knew that I would burn the world to keep you safe. I did not expect that keeping you safe would require me to break your heart, and I am more sorry than words can express." She should not believe him. She should not trust a man who had humiliated her before the entire pack, regardless of his reasons. But she could feel the truth of his words through the bond, could sense his desperate, aching sincerity. And more than that, she could feel his love, vast and terrifying in its intensity, a love that had driven him to become a monster in order to protect her from greater monsters lurking in the shadows. "What happens now?" she asked, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "Now we become conspirators," he said. "I cannot claim you publicly, not yet. The Blood Moon threat is real, and until I can neutralize it, any open acknowledgement of our bond puts you in danger. But I will not leave you alone to suffer. I will assign my most trusted warrior to guard you in secret. I will come to you when I can, in darkness, in stolen moments, and I will work every day to eliminate the threat so that I can finally claim you before the world as you deserve." He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand in his. The contact sent warmth flooding through her veins, reigniting the bond that had nearly been severed. His skin was rough with calluses, the hand of a warrior and a king, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "I know I am asking too much," he said. "I am asking you to trust a man who publicly rejected you. to carry a secret that will cause you pain, to wait for a future that I may not be able to deliver. But I am begging you, Isla. Give me the chance to prove that every cruel word was a lie. Give me the chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved. She looked at him, this powerful king who had knelt at her door and bared his soul, who had sacrificed his own heart to protect hers, however clumsily. She thought of the years of loneliness she had endured, the invisibility, the quiet resignation to a life without love or belonging. She thought of the bond between them, still glowing despite everything, a connection that felt more real than anything she had ever known, and she made her choice. I will need you to actually court me, she said, and a tiny smile touched her lips. Stolen moments in the dark, secret letters, the full romantic experience. If I am going to be your hidden queen, I expect to be wooed properly. The relief that flooded his face was almost comical. The Alpha King, the terror of his enemies, looked like a man who had been given water after dying of thirst. I will write you poems, he said, and there was a raw earnestness in his voice that made her heart clench. Terrible ones, probably. I have never been good with words. But I will try. I will try every day for the rest of my life to be worthy of you. She squeezed his hand. Then we have a deal, my king. And in the darkness of her tiny room, away from the watching eyes of courts and spies and enemies, they sealed their pact with a kiss that tasted of hope. Chapter 4. Stolen Moments. The weeks that followed were both the sweetest and the most painful of Isla's life. To the pack, nothing had changed. She was still the rejected Omega, the object of pity and scorn. The she-wolves who had once ignored her now looked at her with triumphant contempt, pleased that the wolfless librarian had been put in her proper place. The pitying glances were almost worse, the silent sympathy of wolves who were glad they were not her, relieved that the Alpha King's cruelty had been directed at someone else. She endured it. She kept her head down and went about her work in the library, cataloging and mending and organizing, the repetitive tasks a shield against the whispers that followed her wherever she went. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that Matthias was working to eliminate the threat, that one day she would be able to stand at his side openly. She told herself the secret was worth keeping. And in the dark hours of the night, when the castle slept and the world was quiet, she was rewarded for her patience. Matthias came to her whenever he could escape his duties, slipping through the shadows like a thief to steal moments with the woman he loved. They met in the library after midnight, sitting on opposite sides of a reading table because he could not risk leaving his scent on her, their hands inches apart but never touching. They talked for hours, learning each other in whispers. She told him about her childhood, about the parents who had died when she was young and the aunt who had raised her with cold efficiency, about the day she realized her wolf would never come and the grief she had felt for a part of herself that would never exist. He told her about his own past, about the parents he had adored and the night they had been taken from him, about the years he had spent turning himself into a weapon because being a man was too painful. They shared their fears and their hopes and their dreams, building a foundation of trust and understanding that grew stronger with every secret meeting. He wrote her letters, just as he had promised. They were terrible poems, as he had warned, full of awkward metaphors and clumsy rhymes that made her laugh and cry at the same time. He wrote about her eyes like stars in a clouded sky, and her scent like coming home after a war, and the words were earnest and imperfect, and more precious to her than any polished verse could ever have been. She kept the letters hidden in a hollowed-out book in the deepest part of the library, a treasure that no one else knew existed. Her secret guardian was a wolf named Sarah, a female warrior who had served Matthias since he was a young prince, one of the few people in the world he trusted completely. Sarah watched from a distance, never intruding, never acknowledging Isla publicly, but always there. A shadow in the marketplace when Isla went to fetch supplies. A figure on the rooftops when she walked home at night, a reassuring presence that made Isla feel protected, even when the rest of the pack treated her like an outcast. As the weeks passed, Isla began to change. The pain of the public rejection faded into a dull ache, replaced by the warm certainty of Matthias's love. She held her head a little higher. She met the scornful gazes of the other wolves without flinching. She had a secret that none of them knew, a love that burned brighter for being hidden, and it gave her a strength she had never possessed before. And in the quiet depths of her soul, in that place where her wolf had always slept, she began to feel the faintest stirring. Not a full awakening, not yet, but something was changing. The bond with Matthias, growing stronger with every stolen moment, was reaching into that dormant place and coaxing something ancient and powerful toward the light. Chapter 5. The Trap. The Blood Moon Pack was patient. They had waited for years to destroy Matthias Thornfield, and they could wait a little longer. Their spies brought back reports of the rejected Omega, the pitiful, wolfless girl who had been so publicly scorned, and initially they dismissed her. She was nothing, not worth the effort. But one spy was more observant than the others. He noticed that the librarian seemed less broken than she should be. He noticed the female warrior who shadowed her movements without ever acknowledging her presence. He noticed that on certain nights, a figure that looked very much like the Alpha King slipped into the library and did not emerge for hours. He reported his observations to his Alpha, Valerius, and Valerius smiled with the satisfaction of a predator who has caught the scent of wounded prey. The rejection had been a ruse. The wolfless Omega mattered after all, and that meant she could be used. Valerius was not a wolf who favored direct confrontation. He was a schemer, a manipulator, a creature who preferred to let others do his killing while he watched from a safe distance. He could send assassins after the girl, but that would be too easy, too clean. He wanted Matthias to suffer the way Valerius's own father had suffered, when Matthias's armies had destroyed half the Blood Moon territory in retaliation for the murder of the old king and queen. He wanted Matthias to watch helplessly as everything he loved was stripped away. He formulated a plan. They would not kill the girl. They would take her. They would lure Matthias into Blood Moon territory, onto ground where they held every advantage, and they would destroy him in front of her. The king would die, knowing that his attempt to protect his mate had led her directly into the hands of his enemies. It was perfect. The first step was eliminating the guardian. Sarah was good, but she was one wolf against a coordinated assault. They caught her on a night when she was patrolling alone. 3 Blood Moon assassins against 1 Silverwood warrior. The fight was brutal and brief. When it was over, Sarah lay broken in an alley, alive but barely, unable to warn anyone of the danger that had slipped past her guard. The second step was the approach. Valerius sent his most charming emissary, a wolf named Lucian, with warm eyes and a gentle manner that concealed a core of absolute ruthlessness. Lucian came to Isla in the library on a gray afternoon when she was alone, carrying a letter sealed with the Blood Moon crest. "Isla Brennan?" he asked, and his voice was soft with sympathy. "I am sorry to intrude, but I bring an urgent message." Isla took the letter warily. She knew the Blood Moon Pack were her people's enemies, knew that Matthias had spent his entire reign fighting against their treachery, but Lucian's manner was disarming, and the letter in her hands was addressed in an elegant script that seemed more suited to a formal invitation than a threat. She opened it and read words that turned her blood to ice. "We know the truth of your bond. We have your guardian, the wolf called Sarah. She is alive, for now. If you wish her to remain so, you will come with our emissary to Blood Moon territory. Come alone. Tell no one. If Matthias learns of this letter, if he attempts to follow or intervene, we will kill the warrior and send her body back in pieces. You have until nightfall to decide." The letter was unsigned, but it did not need to be. The message was clear. They had her. They had Sarah. And if Isla did not comply, her friend would die, and the trap would simply reset, waiting for another opportunity to spring. For a long moment, Isla could not breathe. Her mind raced through the options, each one worse than the last. She could tell Matthias, but the letter was clear about the consequences. She could refuse to go, but Sarah would be killed, and the blood moon would find another way to get to her. She could run, but there was nowhere in Silverwood territory where they could not eventually reach her. Then another thought occurred to her, one that made her heart ache with a different kind of pain. If she went willingly, if she walked into their trap with her eyes open, she might be able to buy time. Time for Matthias to realize she was gone. Time for him to come after her, not blindly stumbling into an ambush, but with the full knowledge that his enemies had made their move. She could not warn him directly, but she could leave a trail. She could write him a letter of her own, one that would tell him everything he needed to know without alerting the Blood Moon spies, who were surely watching her every move. She asked Lucian to wait outside while she gathered her things. Then, with hands that trembled only slightly, she wrote, "My love, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you must not blame yourself. They have Sarah. They will kill her if I do not come. I know this is a trap, and I know they mean to use me against you. But I also know you. You will come for me, and you will not come blindly. You taught me that love means sacrifice. Now it is my turn. Remember what you told me about Blood Moon, about how they strike. They expect you to come alone, desperate and raging. Do not give them what they expect. Come as the king you are, with the cunning that has kept you alive this long. I will try to stay alive until you reach me. I believe in us. I believe in you. Yours, always and forever, Isla." She hid the letter in the hollowed-out book where she kept his poems, knowing he would look there when he came searching for any trace of her. Then she went outside to meet Lucian, and she followed him out of Silverwood territory without looking back. Chapter 6. The Discovery. Matthias knew something was wrong before anyone told him. The bond, that warm connection that had grown stronger with every stolen moment, suddenly dimmed. Not severed, not the catastrophic break of death, but muted, as if Isla had been moved beyond his reach. He abandoned the war council he had been attending and ran to the library, his heart pounding with a dread he had not felt since the night his parents died. The library was empty. Her scent lingered, but it was hours old, fading. He tore through her small room above the stacks, searching for any sign of what had happened, and found the hollowed-out book where she kept his letters. Her own letter was on top, written in a hand that shook. He read it once, twice, 3 times, each repetition driving the words deeper into his soul. They had taken her. The Blood Moon Pack, the enemies he had been trying to destroy for over a decade, had reached into the heart of his own territory and stolen the woman he loved. And she had gone willingly to protect Sarah, to protect him, sacrificing herself so that he might have the chance to rescue her. The letter told him not to come alone, not to come desperate and raging. She wanted him to be smart, to be the king, to use his cunning. But reading her words, feeling the fading warmth of their bond, all the king could think was that his mate was in the hands of monsters, and every moment he spent planning was a moment she spent in danger. He closed his eyes. He breathed. He forced the beast within him to submit to the man. She believed in him. She had asked him to be clever. He would not fail her. He summoned Kale, his beta, and the wolf arrived within minutes, his face grave. Matthias showed him the letter, watching as Kale's expression shifted from confusion to horror to the cold calculation of a military commander assessing a battlefield. "They want you to come alone," Kale said. "They will have prepared for a single desperate attacker. They will not have prepared for what we can bring against them." "I need a distraction," Matthias said. "Something to draw their attention away from wherever they are holding her. And I need to move fast. The bond tells me she is still alive, but I do not know how long that will remain true." They planned through the night, Matthias fighting the urge to simply run toward Blood Moon territory and tear through everything in his path. The rational part of him knew that Isla was right, that charging in blind was exactly what Valerius wanted. but the mate bond screamed at him to move, to act, to protect, and every hour that passed was agony. By dawn, they had a plan. Kale would lead a force to the eastern border of Blood Moon territory, making enough noise to draw attention and reinforce the idea that Silverwood was responding with military force. While the Blood Moon defenders were occupied with the apparent invasion, Matthias would slip in from the west, using the bond to track Isla's exact location. He would go alone, but not blindly. He would be a scalpel, not a hammer, cutting through their defenses with precision rather than brute force. It was still a desperate plan, still a gamble against an enemy who held all the advantages of home ground. But it was better than the alternative. Matthias shifted into his wolf form as the sun rose, letting the beast take over his body while the man remained in control of the mind. He ran toward Blood Moon territory with the speed of desperation, and the bond pulled him forward like a beacon in the darkness. "Hold on," he thought, willing the words across the distance between them. "I am coming for you." Chapter 7. The Captive. Isla had been in the Blood Moon dungeons for 2 days. The journey had been surprisingly civil, Lucian maintaining his pleasant demeanor even as he led her deeper into enemy territory. It was only when they arrived at the fortress, a grim stone structure nestled in a valley surrounded by cliffs, that the mask slipped. Valerius had been waiting for her. The alpha of the Blood Moon pack was nothing like Matthias. Where Matthias was powerful and commanding, a force of nature that demanded respect, Valerius was thin and sharp, with cold eyes that held no warmth and a smile that never reached them. He looked at her the way a spider might look at a fly caught in its web, with patient, anticipatory hunger. "The little Omega," he had said, circling her slowly. "The king's weakness, wrapped in such an unassuming package. Tell me, does he know you are here yet? Is he already running to your rescue, alone and desperate, exactly as I planned?" Isla had said nothing, keeping her face carefully blank. She would not give him the satisfaction of her fear. They had thrown her into a cell deep beneath the fortress, a cold stone room with a narrow bed and a single barred window that let in thin gray light. She was not tortured, not yet. Valerius seemed to be savoring the anticipation, waiting for Matthias to arrive before beginning the real cruelty. The waiting was its own kind of torment. Isla spent the hours trying to meditate, trying to reach for the bond that connected her to Matthias, but the connection was faint, muted by distance. She could feel that he was alive, could sense the direction of his presence like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north, but she could not communicate with him, could not tell him what he would face when he arrived. On the third day, everything changed. She felt him coming before the alarms began to sound. The bond flared like a flame given fresh oxygen, and suddenly she could feel his rage, his determination, his desperate love. He was close, and he was cutting through everything that stood between them. The sounds of battle drifted down to her cell, distant at first but growing closer. Howls of pain, the clash of claws on stone, and beneath it all, a single, massive presence that tore through the Blood Moon defenses like a force of nature. Guards ran past her cell, their faces pale with fear. She heard one of them say the Alpha King's name with something like awe, and despite everything, despite the bars and the stone and the danger, Isla smiled. She had asked him to be clever, to come as the king. But she had forgotten that Matthias Thornfield was both king and beast. And the beast would not be denied when his mate was in danger. The door to the dungeon level exploded inward. Matthias stood in the doorway, half shifted, caught between man and wolf, in a form that was somehow more terrifying than either. Blood matted his dark fur, wounds scored his body from a dozen different attacks. But his eyes blazed with silver fire, and when he saw her through the bars, the sound that came from his throat was not a word, but something deeper, a primal claim that resonated in her very bones. He crossed to her cell and tore the door from its hinges with his bare hands. Then he was there, in the cell with her, and she was in his arms, and for one perfect moment, nothing else mattered. "I found you," he breathed against her hair, his voice ragged. "I will always find you." "I know," she whispered back, holding him just as tightly. I never doubted. The moment shattered as footsteps echoed from above. Many footsteps, too many to fight. Matthias pulled back, his expression shifting to grim determination. Can you run? He asked. I can do whatever I need to do. They moved together through the dungeon corridors, Matthias leading the way, his senses straining for any sign of ambush. But the sounds of battle from above had fallen silent, replaced by an ominous calm that made Isla's skin prickle with warning. They emerged into the main hall of the fortress and found it filled with wolves. Valerius sat on a throne of black stone at the far end of the hall, flanked by his elite guard, at least 50 warriors arrayed between Matthias and freedom. The Blood Moon Alpha was smiling. Right on schedule, Valerius said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. I must admit, I did not expect you to make it this far. You are more formidable than I gave you credit for. But even you cannot fight your way through all of my warriors, not in your condition. Matthias was swaying on his feet. The wounds he had taken fighting through the fortress were taking their toll, blood dripping from a dozen gashes, his breathing labored. He had given everything to reach her, and now he had nothing left. Isla felt his exhaustion through the bond, felt the desperate determination that was the only thing keeping him upright. Let her go, Matthias growled, his voice barely recognizable as human. Your quarrel is with me. She is innocent. Valerius laughed, a cold, ugly sound. Innocent? She is your weakness, your vulnerability, the key to your destruction. I am going to kill you in front of her, slowly. And then I am going to send her back to your pack with your head as a gift. Your precious Silverwood will crumble without their king, and I will take everything you ever built. He rose from his throne, drawing a long, wicked blade. But first, I want you to know that this is your own fault. If you had simply stayed away from her, if you had let the bond die as you pretended to, she would have lived in obscurity and I would have had no use for her. Your love condemned you both. Chapter 8. The Awakening. Isla watched as Valerius descended from his throne, blade gleaming in the torchlight, and something inside her snapped. She had spent her entire life believing she was weak, wolfless, powerless, a burden to be tolerated rather than a person to be valued. She had accepted the scorn of her pack because she believed, on some deep level, that they were right about her. But Matthias had never believed that. From the moment he felt the bond, he had seen her as precious, as worthy of protection, as a queen despite her lack of fangs. He had sacrificed his own heart to keep her safe, had torn through an army to reach her, had given everything he had and more. And now he was going to die, bleeding and broken, because she had let herself be used as bait. No. The word came from somewhere deep within her, from that quiet place where her wolf had always slept. But it was no longer quiet. It was roaring. The warmth that had been building for weeks, the faint stirrings she had felt during her stolen moments with Matthias, suddenly blazed into an inferno. Her vision sharpened, her senses expanded. She could smell the fear of the Blood Moon guards, could hear the rapid beating of Valerius's heart beneath his confident facade. Power surged through her veins, ancient and wild and utterly untamed. Matthias had fallen to his knees, his strength finally failing. Valerius was raising his blade for the killing blow, savoring the moment, and Isla moved without thinking. She stepped between her mate and his enemy, and when she opened her mouth, the sound that emerged was not a scream, but a growl that shook the very stones of the fortress. Her eyes blazed gold in a face that was no longer entirely human. "Get away from him," she snarled, and her voice carried the weight of command, the unmistakable authority of an alpha. Valerius froze, his blade suspended in mid-swing, his eyes wide with shock. This was not the wolfless Omega he had dismissed as nothing. This was something else entirely. Isla felt her wolf rise within her, no longer dormant, but fully awake. A silver presence that merged with her consciousness and doubled her strength. She had never shifted before, had believed she was incapable of it. But now the change came as naturally as breathing. Bones cracked and reformed, fur sprouted across her skin. And where the timid librarian had stood, a wolf now faced the blood moon alpha, her coat gleaming silver in the torchlight, her golden eyes burning with protective fury. She was not large by wolf standards, but size was not the only measure of power. The bond with Matthias flowed through her, his strength feeding hers even as her awakening fed him. She could feel him rising behind her, the impossible energy of their completed bond pulling him back from the edge of collapse. They stood together, the broken king and his newly awakened queen, and for the first time in this terrible night, the blood moon wolves looked afraid. "Kill them both," Valerius screamed, his composure shattering. "Kill them now!" The elite guard surged forward, and Isla met them head-on. She was untrained, running on instinct rather than skill, but her instincts were sharp and her motivation absolute. She fought not for glory or territory, but for the male behind her, the mate who had given everything for her, and that purpose made her unstoppable. She took down 2 wolves before they could process what was happening, her new fangs finding throats, her new claws opening wounds. Matthias rejoined the fight at her side, the bond between them serving as a kind of battlefield communication, letting each of them know where the other would strike next. They moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. The tide of battle turned. The blood moon guards fell back, their numbers meaningless against the combined fury of the mated pair. Wolves who had expected an easy victory against a wounded king found themselves facing a force of nature, and their morale shattered like glass. Valerius tried to flee. He abandoned his throne and his guards and his pretensions of authority, making for a hidden exit at the back of the hall, a coward to the last. Isla saw him running and felt something cold settle in her chest. This was the wolf who had orchestrated the murder of Matthias's parents. This was the wolf who had tried to use her as a weapon against the man she loved. This was the wolf who would never stop hunting them, never stop seeking revenge, never allow them a moment of peace as long as he drew breath. She broke away from the main fight and pursued. He was faster than her, more experienced, his body honed by years of violence. But she was driven by something beyond speed or skill. The bond pulled her forward, Matthias's rage mingling with her own, and she closed the distance with impossible speed. She caught him at the threshold of his escape, her jaws closing around his ankle and bringing him crashing to the ground. He shifted as he fell, resuming human form, and when he looked up at her, there was finally fear in his cold eyes. "Please," he gasped, and the word was pathetic, a plea from a wolf who had never shown mercy to anyone. "I can give you information, spies in your territory, secrets you need. Let me live, and I will tell you everything." Isla shifted back to human form, standing over him, naked and covered in blood that was not her own. She felt no shame, no hesitation. She was beyond such concerns now. "You killed his parents," she said, and her voice was flat, cold. "You tried to kill him. You tried to use me to break him. There is no information valuable enough to buy your life." Behind her, she heard Matthias approaching, his footsteps heavy but steady. She could end this herself, could tear out Valerius's throat and be done with it. But this was not her kill to make. She stepped aside as Matthias reached her, giving him access to the enemy who had haunted his entire reign. Matthias looked down at Valerius with no expression at all, and that blankness was more terrifying than any rage. Then he moved, quick and efficient, and Valerius died without another word. The sound of it echoed through the hall, a final punctuation mark on a story of hatred and vengeance. The remaining blood moon wolves dropped their weapons and submitted, their alpha dead, their will to fight extinguished. The battle was over. Chapter 9. The Return. The journey home was slow. Matthias was grievously wounded, and even the power of the bond could not heal him instantly. They traveled with Kale and the Silverwood warriors who had served as the distraction force, moving carefully through contested territory until they crossed back into lands that were unquestionably their own. Isla stayed at Matthias's side every step of the way, her new wolf a constant presence within her, alert and watchful. She had spent her whole life believing she was incomplete, a wolf without a wolf, and now she understood that she had simply been waiting for the bond that would unlock everything she was meant to be. They found Sarah alive, barely, in a blood moon cell not far from where Isla had been held. The warrior was too weak to travel on her own, but she smiled when she saw Isla, a fierce, proud smile that said she had never doubted they would come. "You look different," Sarah rasped as they helped her onto a transport. "Something changed." "Everything changed," Isla said, and there was wonder in her voice. When they finally reached the Silverwood Castle, the pack was waiting. Word had spread of what had happened, the impossible rescue, the death of Valerius, the emergence of the rejected Omega as a wolf of power and authority. The whispers that followed Isla now were not whispers of pity, but of awe. Matthias did not wait. He had waited long enough. Despite his wounds, despite the exhaustion that made every movement a struggle, he called for a full pack assembly in the Great Hall, the same hall where he had shattered Isla's heart what felt like a lifetime ago. When every member was gathered, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity and respect, he stood before them with Isla at his side. "You all bore witness to a great wrong in this hall," he said, his voice carrying despite the strain. "You heard me reject the goddess's gift. You heard me speak words of cruelty to the other half of my soul. I told you it was a mistake. I told you she was nothing. I lied." He let the words sink in, watching the reactions ripple through the crowd. "The rejection was a ruse, a desperate attempt to protect my mate from enemies who target love. I failed. My deception did not keep her safe. It drove her into the hands of the Blood Moon Pack, and she nearly died because I was too proud to trust her with the truth from the beginning." He paused, his hand finding Isla's, their fingers intertwining. "But she did not die. She survived. She awoke. And she fought by my side to destroy the wolves who have haunted this pack for a generation. She is not the weak Omega I pretended to reject. She is the strongest wolf I have ever known, and I am not worthy to stand beside her." He turned to face her fully, his storm-gray eyes soft with a love that he no longer needed to hide. "Isla Brennan," he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. "You are my mate, my bond, my heart, my everything. I claim you before this pack and before the goddess. Will you accept me, broken and flawed as I am? Will you be my queen?" The hall was utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on the slim woman in the blood-stained clothes, the librarian who had become a legend overnight. Isla looked back at Matthias, and she saw not the Alpha King, but the man who had written her terrible poems and held her hand across a table. The man who had burned the world to reach her. She saw the future she had once glimpsed in his eyes, the laughter and the children and the life they would build together. "Yes," she said, and her voice rang clear and strong. "I accept you. I will always accept you." The hall erupted in howls of celebration, 1,000 voices raised in joy and relief. The curse was broken, the enemies were vanquished, their king had found his queen, and the Silverwood Pack had never been stronger. Chapter 10. The Queen. In the months that followed, the territories changed. The Blood Moon Pack, leaderless and broken, was absorbed into Silverwood under the condition that they renounce the ways of treachery and submit to the new order. Some resisted and were dealt with. Most accepted, weary of the endless cycle of violence that Valerius had perpetuated. The borders expanded, the people prospered, and at the heart of it all stood two wolves who had found each other against impossible odds. Isla took to her role as queen with the same quiet competence she had brought to her work in the library. She was not a warrior by nature, though she had proven she could fight when necessary. Her strength lay in other areas, in listening and understanding, and finding solutions that others had overlooked. The pack members who had once scorned her now sought her counsel, and she gave it freely, without grudges or recriminations. Matthias watched her flourish and fell in love with her all over again, every single day. He marveled at the woman she had become, and more than that, at the woman she had always been beneath the invisibility that the world had forced upon her. He had seen her strength from the beginning, had recognized it in their first meeting. Now the whole world saw it too. On the anniversary of their claiming, they stood together on the balcony of the castle, looking out over the lands they ruled together. The moon was full, washing everything in silver light, and somewhere in the forest below, wolves howled in celebration of the goddess, who had brought their king and queen together. "Do you ever regret it?" Isla asked softly. "The path we took to get here? The pain?" Matthias considered the question seriously. The night of the gala, when he had spoken those terrible words. The weeks of secrecy and stolen moments. The dungeons of the Blood Moon Fortress, and the desperate battle that had followed. The scars he still carried, both visible and invisible. "I regret every moment of pain I caused you," he said finally. "I regret that I was not brave enough to trust you with the truth from the beginning, that I tried to protect you by hurting you. I will regret that for the rest of my life." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But I do not regret the path, because it led us here, and here, with you, is the only place I have ever wanted to be." Isla smiled, the expression lighting up her face in a way that still took his breath away. "Flatterer," she said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I mean every word. I am not a poet, you know this. But you, Isla Thornfield, are my heart and my home and my reason for living. Without you, I am just a king. With you, I am a man. And that is worth more than any crown or territory or legacy." She leaned up and kissed him, soft and sweet, and he felt the bond between them pulse with warmth and contentment. They had built something together that no enemy could break. A love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than steel. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended and the castle had grown quiet, 2 wolves slipped out into the forest. One was massive and black, moving with the power and confidence of an apex predator. The other was sleek and silver, smaller but no less formidable, her golden eyes gleaming with joy. They ran together through the moonlit trees, their bodies brushing, their minds connected through the bond that had saved them both. They were not king and queen in this moment. They were not alpha and omega. They were simply 2 halves of a whole, finally united, running free beneath the stars. Their howls rose together into the night, a harmony of triumph and love that echoed through the forest and across the territories. It was a song of a love that had been rejected and tested and had ultimately conquered all. And they were home, at last.